together. We are starting Chumash Vayikra, and we are learning from Chelek Yud Zayin, Vayikra Gimel. And we are learning this morning, as we have been doing, L'schus Refuah Shlema V'Rav Yosef Yitzchak Ben Sima Chasya, and also with tremendous emotion and hope and prayer in our hearts that everyone in the conflict area should be safe and should be able to leave if they have to leave, and those that can't leave should somehow have nisim and flois. And ultimately, what we're asking for is that there should be shalom there and all over. We're in, again, Vayikra Gimel, Chelek Yud Zayin, Sif Aleph. The Pasuk, so in our Parsha, in Parak Aleph, Pasuk Tezvav, the Torah says, V'krivay hakayin el hamizbeach. The kayin should bring close, and this is referring to a korban oila in the form of a bird rather than in the form of an animal. And the kayin should bring the bird close to the mizbeach. Umalak es reishay. And the way that the bird was, the life of the bird was terminated in terms of a korban was very specific. It was nipped off. V'hiktir hamizbecha, and it should be burnt on the mizbeach. V'nimtza dama yalkir hamizbeach, and the blood of the bird should be pressed out or wrung out or squeezed out upon the wall of the mizbeach. Hetik Rashi min hakasov. So Rashi cites from the pasuk as hateva is v'nimtza damai, that the blood should be pressed out or wrung out. And uperish, and he explains that the word v'nimtza is l'shain mitzapayim, is similar to the terminology used in a pasuk in Mishlei, which means to wring out the anger. So the word v'nimtza is not an oft-cited word in the Torah, which is why Rashi feels compelled to explain to the Ben Chamish Lamikra and all of us that it's related etymologically to the term mitz, which means to wring or to press or to compress or to squeeze. Ki efes hamatz, and then he brings down a pasuk from Yeshayahu that the milking or the wringing has come to an end. And then Rashi explains what was done practically. So first Rashi gives us two psukim, one from Mishlei and one from Yeshayahu, that use the same shoresh, that use the same root, the same edemat. Then he says, kovesh beis hashchita, that what the kohen would do would be press the site of where the bird was slaughtered, in this case nipped off, al kir hamizbeach, so it would be pressed against the wall of the mizbeach, v'hadam mismatze b'yored, and the blood would get pressed out, and it would trickle down or flow down the wall of the mizbeach. Ubepashtos, and it would seem simply, ba Rashi kan lefarish es tevas v'nimtza. Rashi has come here to explain what the word v'nimtza means. Teva shaloi niskara ad koi bekasov. It's a word that was not mentioned until this very point in the Torah. Ve'ena l'shain regila b'Torah, and it's not something that you trip upon often in the Torah. V'lachein pirshi l'shain mitzapayim ki efes hamatz, and therefore Rashi explains that this is related to words that we do found later in Tanakh, not in the Torah itself, but one in the Ksuvim, one in the scriptures in Mishlei, and one in the prophets, in the Nevi'im, in Yeshayahu. About tzarich lahavin. So here, the Rebbe has six questions on this Rashi, which I think if we would read, our eyes would just glaze over and be like, okay, whatever next. This is like, there's nothing here. One, Bameh kasher hahezber haba b'samuch kovesh beis hashchita al kir mizbeach v'adam mismatza v'yored leperush tevas v'nimtza sheheviyim Rashi b'hemshech echad. The first question is, why does Rashi, in one Dibur HaMaschil, in one instance of giving us commentary, combine both the two citations where the same etymon is used, as well as an explanation of what it was that would actually be done when this kind of carbon was brought? Lich'oira, it would seem, im kavanas Rashi lefarish ofen hamitzui, if what Rashi wants to do is explain to us exactly how the blood was pressed out, squeezed out, wrung out, whatever word you want to use, that should have been in a separate Dibur HaMaschil. That should have been in a separate part of his commentary. First, give us context for the usage of this word at all. Show us where else in the Ksuvim or in the Nevi'im, in the Tanakh, this etymon is used. And then in a separate Dibur HaMaschil, tell us what was actually done. But Rashi puts them together. That's question number one. Beis. Madua hutzrach Rashi lahavi shtei rayos al perush benimtza v'lo histapik ba'achas mehen. The next question is, why does Rashi feel compelled to bring us two citations rather than one? If what he wants to do is just say to us, look here, I know you're not familiar with this word, but this word does appear elsewhere in Tanakh. Good, okay. So why is one not enough? Gimel. The next question is, once he's giving us more than one, why stop at two? Why don't you give us all of the instances in which this etymon is used in Tanakh? The Rebbe says there are many other there are many other places where this shirish, where this etymon is used. Why don't you give us others? And of the others, why do you give us these two specifically? Dafka, Dalit, Yisera Mizu. More so, B'mishlei, in the book of Proverbs, Makar Divrei Rashi Loshem Mitzitzapayim, which is where the first citation comes from. Bir Rashi, Shaloshay Mit, Hikimoiva Yamatz Tal. So in Mishlei, Rashi brings down, again, trying to explain this word that is anomalous. Rashi brings down that it is like what is used in Shoftim, in the prophets, in Shoftim and Judges, where it says that it's like, no, that's Rashi's word, that Vayamatz Tal, that the dew was squeezed out of the fleece. V'im kain, hayal Rashi kan lo havi mi vayamatz tal v'gomer. So if that's what he's using to explain the word mitz in Mishlei, and here he's using the pasuk from Mishlei to explain v'nimtza, so why don't you lechatchila to begin with give us the pasuk vayamatz tal? If that is the best way to understand a little bit about this etymon, give us that pasuk. And there are two additional nuances. Aleph, kasov zeh koidem kasov mishlei. If you're going to go in the order of how the books are presented to us in Tanakh, then the Nevi'im come before the Ksuvim. Shoftim comes before Mishlei. Why not bring it down? And Beis haperish b'mishlei nilmad min hapasuk b'shoftim. And the second thing is that we understand the pasuk in Mishlei from the pasuk in Shoftim. So, like I said, just give us the pasuk from Shoftim straight. Kind of seems like triangular and unnecessary. Hey, mibein harayas atzmat shehevi, and then from among the two citations that Rashi did bring, hiktim es haraya mimitzapayim ha'amor b'mishlei v'loyes ha'pasuk ki efes hamatz ha'amor lefana b'shayahu. Why does Rashi bring them out of the chronological order that the two psukim that he does bring appear in Tanakh? He brings a pasuk from Mishlei, and then he brings a pasuk from Yeshayahu. So he brings a pasuk from Nevi'im after he brings a pasuk from Ksuvim. It should be the opposite. Unless, obviously, the Rebbe is going to point out there's a very precise reason for why Rashi does this. Vav. The pasuk harishon in Mishlei. So from the first citation that Rashi brings, which is from Mishlei, Niskeres haloshen mitz beis pa'amim le'il minei lifnei mitz apayim. In that particular pasuk itself, the pasuk from Mishlei, the word mitz, again, which is related etymologically, appears twice above the instance which Rashi brought down. So the word mitz appears 3 times in the pasuk, and Rashi chooses the third instance. The entire pasuk, or the seminal parts of the pasuk, read like this: Mitz chalav yotzi chema. When you squeeze milk, butter will come out. Umitz af yotzi dam. And if you strike or you squeeze a nose, blood will come out. Rashi doesn't cite those. And instead, Rashi brings the third instance, which is mitz apayim, wringing out the anger. So these are the 6 questions that Rashi has, that the Rebbe has on this Rashi, and now he's going to explain. And of course, what the Rebbe does first is explain what is Rashi's true question. Once we understand what is Rashi's true question, then we're in a position to understand exactly what Rashi did and didn't do. Beis, Habir b'cholzeh, the explanation of all of this. Rashi loy ba rak lefarish es tebas v'nimtza. So Rebbe says, let me disabuse you of what you think Rashi's trying to do here. You think he's trying to just explain a word that is not seen often, and that the Ben Chumash and Vayikra is not yet seen in Chumash. But that's not what he's trying to do. He's also elagam litaret she'ela hamisareres kan bepasuk. Rashi is coming also to address a question that is aroused in this verse, in this pasuk. Why? Because v'nimtza hu lashon nif'al. Because the word v'nimtza, and it will be squeezed out, is a passive cognate. Hainu, this means davar hanasa ki'ilu me'alav. It's almost like it will be done on its own. It's not an active verb, like you will squeeze out, but rather it will be squeezed out. Shahadam mismatze me'alav al kir hamizbeach. It makes it sound like the blood will be squeezed out of its own volition on the wall of the mizbeach. Al yidei behikter hamizbecha oy al yidei hamaliko kiyetibazeh. This will be done. This will happen somehow, either through you offering it on the mizbeach, burning it on the mizbeach, or through nipping off the head, or in some other fashion. Ve'enu muvan. And this is, of course, not understood, because min hakasuv le'il, from the above pasuk that comes before the pasuk we are looking at, kfar yadua, we already know, shebekorban oila min habehema yeshnon kama avodas. We already know that in a korban oila, which this korban is mirroring, but in the form of a bird. So we know that generally speaking, not everybody, just like today, had the same financial portfolio and socioeconomic bracket, etc. So the Torah gives choices. So a more wealthy person could bring an animal, a less wealthy person could bring a bird, and a less wealthy person yet could bring a meal offering. However, it has the same weight, and it's for the same purpose. And so therefore, we already know the different avodas that have to be done with the korban oila that is brought with an animal. There has to be shchita, there has to be the slaughter, there has to be zrikas hadam, the sprinkling or the flicking of the blood on the mizbeach, and there has to be haktara, there has to be the burning. Umemela. And so once we understand this, so now we have a question, which is, it's one thing if you're talking about the services of slaughter and burning. We see the parallel also in the oila that is brought of a bird. But with a bird, you have the nipping off of the head instead of the actual slaughter. And you're going to have, of course, the burning. But we don't find something that will parallel the flicking or the sprinkling of the blood on the mizbeach. And apparently this was a very important avodah. So as much as we can't relate to it and we don't understand exactly what the efficacy is of this, but we know, on Yom Kippur, we achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim, like there's a whole the whatever was done with blood, moving it from one receptacle to another, flicking it on the mizbeach, flicking it on the bottom of the mizbeach, flicking it on top of the mizbeach. There were all kinds of different avodas with the blood. They are important, and that, the Rebbe says, is really what Rashi is coming to address. Where is the parallel avoda with the blood in the oila that is brought of a oif of a bird? Lachain, therefore, after Rashi brings the citations, the proof texts of what the word v'nimtza means, then he comes quickly and he adds that what appears to be in the pasuk a passive verb, that almost like it's going to happen by itself. No, it comes to the work of a person. And it's a very specific type of work. And what is it? He presses the site of the nip, of the slaughter, onto the wall of the mizbeach, and the blood is squeezed out and it trickles down. And this is al derach avodas rikas hadam ala mizbeach. And so this is modeled in the same kind of paradigm as the flicking or the sprinkling of the blood on the mizbeach. And with this, the Rebbe has answered one of his 6 questions, which is, why does Rashi not put the description of what they did in a separate Dibur HaMaskil? And the Rebbe says, very simply, because he's coming to teach us something more than just what the word v'nimtza means. First, he does have to tell us what the word means by showing us other places in Tanakh that it's used. But the real question he wants to address is, where is the sprinkling of the blood? And that's what he does. Gimel. Al pizem muban hatam shabacha Rashi lahavi raya mishnei psukim elu dafka. And once you understand what Rashi's real question is, then you can understand why Rashi chose these 2 psukim from the various psukim in Tanakh that have a word that is related etymologically to the word in our pasuk. Mipnei shebahem mudgash shetoichan v'nimtza mitz kashur in pu'ulas ha'adam kvisa. Because it's through these psukim specifically and precisely that Rashi is underscoring that the word in our pasuk v'nimtza, which seems to be passive, is related to and connected to a very specific pu'ula, very specific action on the part of a person. And that is the action of pressing. So, I never related this, but maybe it's not new to you, but for me, I just love like etymons and word stories. So kvisa is the Hebrew word for a wash, for laundry, because one of the things that happens in the kvisa is it gets pressed out, it gets wrung out. Just saying, for next time we go to Israel. Okay. Mitchilas hapasuk b'mishlei. So now the Rebbe is going to show us what he means by why Rashi chose these 2 psukim out of all the other psukim in Tanakh that have this same etymon. Mitchilas hapasuk b'mishlei, from the beginning of the pasuk in Mishlei, mitz chalav yotzi chema, again, that squeezing, and we'll soon get more specific in the word group of squeezing, because you wouldn't exactly squeeze milk. You would beat it or whisk it or strike it. Yotzi chema, you'll get butter. Umitz af yotzi dam, and again, you wouldn't really like wring out a nose, but more like hit it. Ein raya lenidun didan shevenimtza hu ba'ofen dekoves beis hashchita. So you remember the Rebbe had a question about why did Rashi specifically cherry pick the last part of that pasuk, which is the 3rd time that the same word is used, mitz. And he uses it, mitz apayim, squeezing out the anger, rather than squeezing out the milk or squeezing out the nose. And the Rebbe says, why does Rashi do that? This is because the butter coming out of the milk and the blood coming out of the nose is not necessarily the result of a continuous action on the part of a person. Shel kvisa, of pressing, or lechitza, pressuring. Ella, al yedei chabata, but rather with the milk yielding butter, it's about striking it. Vahaka'a, it's about beating the nose. And more than this, more than it's not, even though the same word mitz is being used, but the usage of the word as related to milk or as related to a nose is not the same as what we need to understand about the word v'nimtza in our pasuk, pressing out the blood from the bird. Why? Because it can happen without concerted effort, whereas the blood from the bird, you have to keep pressing on it. And even more so, lifamim ba davar me'alav. And the Rebbe says, and sometimes this happens on its own. Hachema safa maila b'chalav me'aleha. Sometimes the butter floats to the top on its own. And sometimes blood flows on its own from the nose. It's not necessarily that somebody punched you in the nose. You could get a nosebleed unprovoked by any action. The Rebbe says we see this practically. And that's why Rashi specifically brings mitz apayim yotzi riv, that the pressing on the anger or the drawing out of the anger will lead to altercation, will lead to a fight. Mipnei shesham hamitz hu ba'osei oifen kekovesh is beishchita, because in that usage, it's most similar to what Rashi tries to explain to us about the blood being pressed out against the wall, where a person has to keep holding their hand there. They have to keep doing the pu'ula, they have to keep doing the action. Al yidei lechitzas udechifas hakas lechitz. So it's the same thing. It's through pressing and pushing the anger that yotzi riv, that you get into a fight, that you get into an altercation, nasis meriva. So I'm sure we could talk about this for a while. In other words, the Rebbe is saying that it takes effort to start a fight. It's not like, what's it called? Spontaneous combustion. It just happens. You have to put some effort into it. You have to press it out. You have to draw it out. And but the Rebbe says, and now he's going to answer another question. This will be the third question that he's answering, which is why did Rashi bring down more than one citation? He says, but this is not enough. This alone would not be enough. Why? Shekain hamitz apayim hu pe'ula she'ena b'ma'aseh. Because it's true. Why Rashi brought this first citation is because with this citation, he wants to show, one, that there has to be effort on the part of the person, and second, that it's a continued effort. But it's not a physical effort. It's not a physical action. It's not like what Rashi explains had to be done with the gullet of the bird, that it had to be pressed against the wall and then the blood would drain from it. It's not like that, because when you have an argument, it's not a physical thing you're doing. That's why Rashi brings down the second citation, which is that the wringing out has been discontinued. And there Rashi explains the chalav v'chema, that this is talking about milk and butter, hanischatim mitzoin ubakar, that are pressed out, that are wrung out. So note the edaman in nischatim of schita, which is one of the lamites malachis, right? We're not allowed to wring out on Shabbos. Shazu yasiyah. This is an action. And it's not something that happens through hitting. You don't hit the udder of the cow and the milk comes out. You have to wring it out. You have to press it out. And it takes concerted and continued action. Okay, fine. So then why didn't Rashi bring only the second citation? Why did he bring the first? In the second, it would seem that we have both an action and we have a similar action. Aval harayami ke'efes ahmatz bilvad gam ena maspekes. But this would not have been enough on its own either. Why? Mipnei shasham efshar lefarish. Because in that second citation, you could say that tevas matz, that the word there of wringing or pressing or compressing, eina madgisha es paulas hamitzui gufa, is actually not underscoring the action of pressing. It's not a verb, it's a noun. It's describing what would be gained through the wealth and the honor of having many sheep and many cows, having a lot of cattle. In other words, the Rebbe is saying, Ki Efes Hamat serves a very important purpose because it's both a physical action that's similar to what was done with the bird on the Mizbeach, and it's continuous. So it serves all three of those purposes that the other two don't. The only problem here is that it's not clear that it's so much addressing a verb, the action, but it might be addressing what you gain from having so much sheep or so much cattle. You get the result, you get the derivative. This is all a result of the fact that you own these flocks from which you can press out so much milk and so much butter. Keperush Rashi Sham, like Rashi explains there, Hamit Shalcha Oishrecha Ukfoidecha. What you press out is your wealth and your honor and your prestige. That you have through the fact that you own all these sheep and all these cattle. That you pressed out from them the milk and the butter. So the word hamatz there, again, might not be speaking so much about the action of squeezing or milking or pressing or compressing, but more about a description of what you own. And now he answers a fourth question, why Rashi had to bring both, but also why he put the one from Mishlei before the one from Yeshayahu. As Haraya Mitz Apayim, he brought the words Mitz Apayim from Yeshayahu, Shesham Hayraz Tevas Mit, he Pu'ulas Halachitza Mamash. Because in that verse, in that pasuk, it's actually speaking about the squeezing, the compressing, the pressing, the milking, whatever term you want to use. The striking, the wringing, there's so many words that are in this family. Dalet. So in case you're thinking, okay, maybe Rashi could have just solved all of his problems elegantly by bringing, instead of these two psukim, each one of which is missing something, just bring this perfect pasuk from Shoftim, which of course you're going to now hear. The Rebbe sees the imperfections. Vayomatz tal min hagaza, that the dew was wrung from the fleece. Shehi asiya. So here we have wringing, we have an action. But the Rebbe says, but in that pasuk there in Shoftim, lifnei hatevas vayomatz tal, before the words and he wrung out the dew, ksiv vayazar es hagaza, he wrung out the fleece. There's another word used there for ringing. Dahainu, shesachat es hagoza kedivri Rashi sham lashon mechabes. So Rashi is explaining that Vayazer means that he wrung out the fleece. And after the wringing out was already done, then move on, then it's understood, Shevayamatz Tal, that squeezing out the dew, She'ira la'achar mikain, that was a second step that came after Vayazar, Loi koi al pa'ulas hakfisa shel ubahagoza atzman, is not talking about, again, the actual action of wringing, pressing, compression, ella al yitzias hatal minagaza. Rather, it's describing the way in which the dew left the fleece. Kisiyum hapasuk, like we see from the end of the verse, vayamatz tal minagaza, the dew left, was squeezed out from the fleece, Meloi hasefel mayim, and it filled the receptacle with water. So one of the things that's so important that we can learn from this is that, and we already know this, context, context, context. Like it's not enough just to take a look at part of a pasuk or part of a paragraph, because the same words can have very different meanings depending on the context of the larger verse or the larger paragraph, and so on and so forth. So the Rebbe has now explained why Rashi does not use the pasuk that he used in Shoftim. And therefore, it's not the proper example for our case here. Because in our case, again, the word v'nimtza damai, and you shall press out the blood, it comes to speak not of what a person will gain from the blood leaving, not about the blood leaving the bird, but about the person pressing on that site of the bird and pressing out the blood. Masha Inkain, in contradistinction, b'mishlei ba Rashi lefarish zesad hashava shel kol shloshes inyanim hamor b'pasuk. But why does Rashi bring down the pasuk from Shoftim in Mishlei? Because in Mishlei, Rashi is coming to another thing. He's coming to explain to the one who is learning the pasuk in Mishlei what the three instances of the word mitz, how they are all they all share a common denominator. Mitz chalav, the pressing of milk; mitz af, the pressing of the nose; and mitz apayim, the compression of the anger. She'ena ba'ofen ha'pa'ula b'chalav, because it's not like what you do with milk. Af va'apayim, the nose is different, the anger is different. Ki adarabba, on the contrary, b'chol echad mehem hadavar hu alidei pa'ula acheres. Each one of these three instances, the wringing, pressing, compression, drawing out, striking, whatever word you want to use, it's different. Ella inyan shekim b'shava, but what they do share, b'chol hashlosh, in all three, hu taitzas ha'pa'ula, they share the same effect. Pa'ulos yotzi, that something comes out. Taitzas hamitz, that something comes out from, in each case, the wringing, the pressing, the striking, the whisking, whatever term you want to use, they all yield a result. And so in order for Rashi to make that point, there it is the correct citation and proof text to bring the pasuk from Shoftim by Yamatz Hatal, that the dew was wrung out, midaber oidos yitzias uschitas hatal, because in that pasuk it speaks about what left the fleece, that the dew left the fleece through it being wrung out. Va'alpi kol anal, move on. And so now once we understand all of the above, it's understood. And now it's abundantly clear why Rashi doesn't give us the actual instructions of the pi'ula, of the action, in a separate dibur hamaschil. And he brings it rather as a continuation of the citations that he uses to clarify the terminology. Because in order to understand why he would bring those citations to explain the pu'ula, the action, you have to understand what was actually done with the bird on the wall of the Mizbeach. And then you will understand why Rashi brings those particular psukim and not others. Because remember, Rashi's real question is, where is the parallel to Zrikas Adam? So he wants to underscore that this is the parallel and exactly how it was done, and where we find in Tanakh psukim that mirror this usage of the term. Hey, avaladayan ain't a movement, but it's still not understood. Why is it so necessary here to underscore that the pressing of the blood happened specifically in the way that it did, pressing on the place of the slaughter or the death, the nipping? And because Rashi wants to underscore that it was done through this pressure point, that's why he has to bring down these two specific psukim, not others. But why is it so important? Exactly how the blood flowed. So we might say, based on what we said above, that because once Rashi alludes to the fact that that the pressing of the blood out of the bird is in the same style and is in place of the sprinkling of the blood on the Mizbeach, mistaber sheyeshna dimyum bein behapulas. So then it makes sense to postulate that there is also a similarity in how this is done. And this would be specifically if it's done through pressing, pressing on the place where the bird was killed. Let's say if the blood would leave the bird through hitting the bird, like in the pasuk that the nose bleeds because you hit the nose. Then again, like the Rebbe said above, it's not a situation where the blood flows only as long as you are pressing, as you are hitting. Because you could punch a person in the nose, you could hit them, they could fall, and the nose could continue to bleed for a while, even after there's no continued compression on the nose. The blow begins the flow of the blood, and then the blood continues to flow on its own for a while. But in contradistinction, the liquids that flow through pressing, like milking an animal or something like that, so the continuation of the flow of the liquid is the result of continued compression on the part of a person. Or in modern times, it's a machine. But the point is continued compression, continued squeezing, continued milking. And because Rashi wants to underscore to us that these words in the Torah, v'nimtza damai, that you should squeeze out its blood, is parallel to the sprinkling or the flicking of the blood onto the Mizbeach, and that is done through a constant action of the Kohen. Al kain pirish Rashi shakenu gam b'v'nimtza damai. Therefore, Rashi, not in a separate place, but right away where he's explaining the word, tells us how this happens. It happens al yedei koives beis hashchita. It happens through wringing. It happens through pressing. It happens through compressing on the place where the bird was killed. Okay. With this, the Rebbe has answered all 6 questions that he asked. And now we get to the part that you're waiting for. Miyena shel Torah b'perish Rashi zeh. Okay, so who would ever think that this kind of Rashi has a lesson for us, right? Again, this kind of Rashi, which whatever, not the Rashi you're going to teach to your 2nd graders, 5th graders, 8th graders, even high schools. Like Yeduim divrei Haramban. The Rebbe says it's known, the words of the Ramban, regarding the different aspects of service that were done with each korban. Hamachaper al adam. And each of these services was not just stam, but each was a component in the kapara, in the atonement process of the person. And the Ramban writes, Shahal adam lachshev ki chata lalekav. A person must think during this process, right? You can't just bring an animal. Like the Abish is not looking for barbecue. It's all about the inner landscape and what's happening on the part of the person. So the person has to think that he sinned to his God, begufoi ubenafshoi, with his body, with his soul, and actually he deserves that, God forbid, his blood should flow, and his body should be burnt. Lule chesed haboira, if not for the kindness of the Creator, shelokach mimenu truma, that took from him something in his stead. Damoy dahakorban tachas damoy nefesh tachas nefesh. He took the Eibishter accepts the blood of the korban instead of his own blood. He accepts the body of the korban instead of his own. V'zeu gam toichen inyan hakrabas chelev hakorban b'damei ala mizbeach. And this is also why specifically the specific fats of each korban and the blood had to end up on the mizbeach. Sheba'avodas ha'adam, because what does fat and blood symbolize in our life, in kind of our overtures and expression? Hu hatainuk, the chelev, the blood, embodies the pleasure, bahariticha, and the passion, bahaislavos, and the enthusiasm. No, sorry. The chelev is the tainuk, sorry. The fat is the pleasure, and the riticha and the slavos, the passion and the enthusiasm, are the blood. And so the pleasure, the passion, and enthusiasm, all three, shetzarech ha'adam lahakriv limsor b'shleimus HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This all has to be brought as an offering to God, to give it over completely to Hashem. This is where our passion should go. This is where our enthusiasm should go. This is where our pleasure should go. In other words, fine, it's okay to do what we have to do in the world of Gashmias, fine. But, again, like the famous words of feet in Galoshin is good, but a head in Galoshin is not okay. So I don't know. It's interesting because me, like many other people in this class, were old enough to remember when Crown Heights had one restaurant. When people, yes, they hosted Shabbos and Yom Tov. There's no question about it, and people always wanted to make nice meals. But the koch and the bren and the whole culture surrounding the Gashmias, it's another world today. It's just anyway, whatever. I'm just old-fashioned. What do I know? But,
so he's saying here that all of that is not necessary.
He's saying it's necessary to be channeled towards the Eibishter. Where does the chelev and the dam belong? It belongs on the korban.
Right. Okay.
Okay, good. So maybe you could say that the korban is the Shabbos meals and the Yom
Yeah.
Tov meals. Good, okay, and if you have to make these gorgeous whatever, so more people will come to Pulas, you can still find a place for that. But there's a lot of other stuff that's just, there's just so much emphasis on the Gashmias. It didn't exist by us Hasidim, earlier. It just wasn't a thing. But it's another whole story, and I should not editorialize.
Well, it's zelo mazeh.
Meaning,
On one hand, us ladies sitting here learning sichos of the Rebbe, we didn't have that then either.
so why can't we have more of this?
You could, no, I'm saying it's okay for us to work on it, but I'm just saying we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of more gashmis in this world, and there's a lot more ruchnius also. And that's just the way it is. It has to have that balance. Otherwise, there won't be a balance anymore. And Hashem wants this balance.
Okay, I hear you. I hear. Thank you. And so therefore, at the end of the Torah's description of the first category of karbanos, which is the korban oila, baregam oila mechaperes al mitzvah say va'alav shenitek lase, and the oila is the korban that comes to atone on positive mitzvahs and also prohibitions linked with a positive mitzvah. Medayek Rashi. So Rashi is very specific. Bivinimtza damai bizrika hadam shebazeh ikar ina kapara. So Rashi underscores the overture that paralleled the flicking or sprinkling of the blood on the mizbeach, which the Rebbe says here is actually the main inyan of kapara in a korban. Shetoichen hakapara da hakorban hu beinin hamitz hakfisa. Because the Rebbe says that what he wants to illuminate here is that the essence and the content of atonement, of bringing a korban, is the ringing and the pressure that is brought to bear on the person's soul. Hahiskafia, the bending, ubitul, hametzius, and subduing the self-abnegation. And only when you do that internal pressure washing, let's just say, and only then, through this ringing, does the passion, reticha means boiling, the boiling passion, and the hislavos and the enthusiasm, b'taivas ha'olam, in the taiva towards this world, only then does it leave, does it flow out like the blood flowed from the bird. It takes work, because once this roiling passion enters our bloodstream, enters our mindset, enters our culture, it's very hard to squeeze it out, because everybody's doing it. So everybody's child is telling them that everybody else has kach, v'kach, v'kach, v'kach. And everybody else has this on their table and that on their table. And everybody else eats this and that and that. And everybody else's kiddush has this and this and this. It's like it's very hard to get out of that morass. And that's why Rashi brings down that the nimtza is etymologically similar to the squeezing out of anger. Because in this idea, this construct of that through the pressing out of anger, through the prolongation of anger, there emerges this fight, there comes to expression in illusory form, in a remez, the main content of what a chait is. And also, derech hatshuva v'kapara al chait. And also the way that we do tshuva and the way in which we derive atonement for a chait. Only the Rebbe could do this. Zayin. B'negei lekas. Regarding anger, Amru Razal, our sages taught us, Kol hakoyes ki'ilu eved avodah zarah. Anybody who gets angry, it's like he served avodah zarah. Ukabir Rabbeinu Hazaken, and like the Alter Rebbe explains in Igeres HaKodesh, Lefisha be'ez ka'asai, because when a person is in the throes of their anger, nistalka mimenu ha'emuna, it means that his faith in Hashem leaves him. Ki'ilu haya maimin sheme'ez Hashem ha'isazais, because if you would really believe that this is from Hashem, whatever the this is that he's angry about, loy haya bikas klal, he would not be in anger at all. Kiloima, this is to say, shebe'inyan hakas boli de bitui harichuk me'akadosh baruch hu, that anger expresses the distance between the person and God. So much so that it's ki'ilu oived avodah zarah. It's as if he is worshiping idols. V'davar zeh harehu nekudas kol ha'averos, and really, this is the central point of every avera. Kibir Rabbeinu Hazaken, like the Alter Rebbe explains. Because in every avera that a person trespasses the will of Hashem, he separates himself at that moment from God. So it's a little bit of the same effect of avodah zarah. So this is the inner understanding of those last few words of that pasuk in Mishlei, that when you press on anger or you prolong anger, a fight will follow. Al yedei avera, because through doing an avera, naser riv im HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you get into a fight, an altercation with God. Ella, it's only that with anger, it's even more obvious, it's even more expressed. Whereas in other averos, and the Rebbe says, and that's why it's only about certain averos that it says it's as if you served idol worship. Because even though the Alter Rebbe explains to us that every single avera is like avodah zarah, because every single avera is about putting distance between you and Hashem, but in some averas it's more blatant. Ka'as, anger is one of those. Al-kei nemar hadavar b'mitz apayim. That's why Rashi brings the words mitzapayim, the pressing of anger, because in this avera, it's more prominent. And remember that the whole Karban Oila is to get kapara on the trespass of averas. So it's like to say that if your spouse really hates when you do something, it could even be like a tiny little stupid thing. If you love them, you're not going to do that. And it's true that you're not draining their bank account or doing something else heinous or whatever. But it's still an infidelity. It's still a trespass. It still puts distance between you. And when a person brings a korban and he does teshuvah on his trespasses, then there is also this process of pressing on the anger and an altercation emerging. But now it's about his pressing or compressing on his anger. And he incites his Yetzer Tov on his Yetzer Hara. And this is generally the process of tshuva. And I'm just going to give it away now, just so, because I think sometimes when you have it before, it clarifies something. The Rebbe is going to say that's why it doesn't say mitzaf yotzi riv. It says mitzapayim. It's plural, angers, because there's an anger that brings the trespass against Hashem, and then there's an anger against the Yetzer Hara that brings the tshuva. It's happening in two ways. Again, Kainhu b'tshuva kol avera, sha'adam koivesh, a person suppresses umevatesh and crushes is a yetzahara, sheheviyah la'avar al ritzayna elyon, that brought him to trespass the celestial will, uliyos nifrad me'elikos, and to separate himself from godliness. And through tshuva, there's also an altercation. The altercation this time is ima yetzahara. V'lachein ksiv kan apayim loshen rabim, and that's why it says here apayim. Hainu hakas hamevis harivim hakadosh baruch hu ramatzlan ukivush hakas lefreshi atzma misura, because both the anger that brings the fight with God forbid, and on the other side of things, the suppression and the anger that brings him to separate himself from the Isser, from the prohibition, Bishas HaTshuva, when he's doing Tshuva, the Habas HaKarban, and when he's bringing the Karban, Hamevius Harivim HaYetzahara. The plural term, Apayim, alludes to both of these fights, both of these angers, as it were. Ella Sheyached L'Lisar Shela. The Rebbe says, but there could still arise another question. Because a Jew really has no connection to Averis. What kind of connection does a neshama have with Averis? The whole thing is illogical. And like the Alter Rebbe told us, or you could say that like the Alter Rebbe defined for us, Yehudi, what's a Jew? A Jew is one who does not want to and cannot be separated from godliness. So what's the connection between a Jew and an Avera B'chla? But when a Jew stumbles with an Avera, this is actually a libel. It's a ruse. This is something that the Eibishter contrived to happen from above. Kaviyachol. And therefore it says, Bal yidach mimenu nidach. Nobody will be banished from before you. Asher seif kol echad mi Yisrael yashav b'tshuva. At the end, every single one of Bnei Yisrael has to return to tshuva. Not because they're going to be forced to, but because this is our default. Because the whole inyan of sinning is the overlay that doesn't belong to us. Therefore, so then who needs the whole chait? If we're anyway going to return to our pristine holiness, if we're going to return to our default inability to be affected by an Avera, why does the Eibishter cause us to stumble? Naira alila al b'nei adam, right? Chassidus speaks about this over and over. Why did the Eibishter make the chait? Why did the Eibishter make the eitz hadas and warn them not about it if the Eibishter didn't want them to eat from it? Why did the Eibishter make that they should sin with the chait egel? Rashi ki efes hamatz. For this, Rashi brings down the next pasuk, ki efes hamatz, that there is a cessation to what will flow out. And this refers to the milk that is squeezed out or milked out or wrung out from the sheep and the cattle. It refers to the milk that is derived through the process of wringing and pressing. La'achar hasiyas hatshuva. And metaphorically, this is the wringing and the pressing that is part of the tshuva, and the milk is the result of the tshuva. Hu bedugmas inyan hachalav. What comes out of the person after tshuva is like milk. I feel like right here somebody would say, Her avort. Listen to what the Rebbe is going to say next. Chalav mitzad atzmai, milk by itself. Yesh kasal kidaitach. There's a possibility, b'teiras emes, in the Torah of truth, shahi etzarek liyes asur. That milk should have been forbidden. Why? Because the blood of the body thickens and it becomes milk. So in other words, we're not allowed to drink blood. Why are we allowed to drink milk? And we're not allowed to eat Ever Min HaChai. We're not allowed to eat a limb off of an animal. So why should we be able to have a derivative of the animal, the milk? Ella, it's anomalous. But the novelty of the Torah is that Hashem said it's permitted. And not only it's permitted, it's not just permitted, it's something that we say is a praise for Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash. Chalav is something that we look at with great, I don't know. Today, Chalav's getting a lot of competition with the oat milk and the almond milk and the rice milk and the soy milk and there must be 16 other types of milk. And people, if you ask someone milk in their coffee, you have to qualify cow's milk or what kind of milk. So, but in general, milk is nishtapcha. It was a praise. So the fact that milk can be ingested by us shows an in of hishapcha, transformation, because there really is a kasal kidaitach that it should be something that's asur, but it becomes mutar. Hishapcha, transformation. It's davar shahiyatzarech liyas asur al pi hatayra v'hatayra matirasei ba'af mishpachtei. According to Torah itself, it should have been prohibited. Not only does the Torah transform it into something permissible, but it also becomes something praiseworthy. And it's the same thing spiritually in the analog. The ultimate goal of us sinning, of us getting into a fight with the Eibishter Chas v'Shalom, and then later doing tshuva, getting into a fight with the Yetzer Hara, Shetchila of our Adam Avera, initial Riv L'Gabe Baruch Hu. First, the person did an Avera, and there was distance and a fight with Hashem. Then he compresses, he presses, he wrings out, he gets into a fight. What's the tachlis of all this? What's the tachlis of Kavana? He l'shem inyan hayiskafya v'hafla. It's all for the purpose of the bending, the abnegation, and the transformation, hafichas hara l'tayif, transforming the evil, the bad to goodness. Kemavur betanya, like the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, beperish hapasuk kol Paul Hashem l'ma'aneu v'gam rasha l'yom ra. Alter Rebbe explains this on the words, everything that Hashem does is for him, and even the rasha and his day of evil. Perush sheyashuv me'rishay. What does this mean? That ultimately the rasha will come back from his evil, the yasa rasha lo yoim va'or l'mayla, and his bad will even be transformed to become liyoim. The yoim ra will become yoim va'or l'mayla, will become daytime, daylight, goodness, and light above. V'al yedei zeh nasa reach nichayach laHashem. And through this becomes a pleasing fragrance to Hashem. The Rebbe has many other sichas on what does it mean, reach nichayach. Obviously, it's not the smell of barbecue. Nachas ruach lakadosh baruch hu becomes nachas to Hashem. Midvarim charifim oy mechumatzim. Alter Rebbe explains that there's different, just like people have different preferences in food, in their palate, so too there are different types of nachas ruach given to the Eibishter. Some come l'chatchila from sweet things, but some are sharp and salty things. Rak shehem mitubalim, but they are seasoned. Umitukanim, I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Umitukanim, I think hetev, but they are fixed properly. Achanasu madanim, they become gourmet foods. Lahashiv hanefesh, to revive the soul. V'stalik yikara dekuchabricha b'chula almin, and this brings down Hakadosh Baruch Hu in all of the worlds. And it's 11:04. So wishing everybody a good day, and the Shataka be Yeshuas in the whole world, and everybody that needs a Yeshua and needs help right now and needs to safety and good health, everything. Kol Tov should come to everybody in this Chodesh Adar, in this year where the Rebbe said that it's all the Ra has to become Batal B'Shishim. So we should see how it all becomes Batal B'Shishim in the Simcha of Adar. Kol
Amen.
Tov.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.